Well, hi there. Welcome to Liberty.me live / or subtitle free association. I'm Lucy Steigerwald. I'm here with Sheldon Richman, and you know our work from various places. Even if some of us, hint me, do not have as much work in various places, but damn it, I still have time. No, it's fine. It's going to be a good evening because it's always a good evening here with Sheldon. And shall we dive in, I guess?
Sure. In the libertarian headlines, Sarah Palin has endorsed Donald Trump. That's a joke.
Yeah. Very.
That's not a joke. It's not a joke. Well, in one level it's a joke, and in another level it's not a joke. It can be both a joke and not a joke at the same time. But it certainly wasn't libertarian news. I just threw that in. Make it relevant. But that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about, although I suppose Phil has some choice things to say about it, Iran, or Iran, as I like to call it. Wonder what you're doing back there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pretend I'm not in a bathroom right now, which I am.
So last week was an interesting week. We're talking about Iran and the reaction by the two wings of the war party, namely the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the two divisions. And it was an interesting week, beginning on Tuesday and Wednesday. Just to back up, on Tuesday, as Obama was getting ready to give his annual State of the Union address, his final one as president, two armed American naval boats, I think they're considered boats, crossed into Iranian waters right near their very militarily sensitive Farsi island in the Persian Gulf. These boats were going from, where were they going? From Bahrain to, I don't know, somewhere, and apparently it's a trip they've made many, many times, but for reasons that the government keeps changing, the boats crossed into Iranian territorial waters. That's not in dispute. The government at first said they had engine trouble, and then they said they were running out of gas, and then it turned out no, it was a navigational error. All kinds of things. You can read Glenn Greenwald's stuff at The Intercept to see how the reasons have been shifting, the excuses have been shifting. Of course, don't dare suggest maybe it was there for less than innocent reasons. Espionage, checking out defenses or something like that, or just trying to create an incident. Maybe a little Gulf of Tonkin incident. You're not allowed to discuss that in polite society. You probably won't get invited to certain parties if you talk about that, but heck, I don't get invited to any party, so I have nothing to lose. So this was right before the State of the Union address. Republicans got mad and said, cancel the State of the Union address, which is kind of funny, but they didn't do that, and Obama didn't mention the incident in the State of the Union address, and neither did Nikki Haley, who gave the official Republican response afterwards. She didn't mention it either. And lo and behold, the next day, the Iranians released the 10 sailors unharmed. However, there were certain things that really got under the skin and the saddles of the hawks, which is almost all of them. Namely, that Iran released a video of the 10 sailors, one of which is women, by the way, on their knees on the boats like this, with the hands behind their heads, with Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps sailors aboard there. And then also they released a video once they were on the island, eating meals, kind of smiling, which of course no good red-blooded American would do while in Iranian captivity. And one of them, the captain, I guess, or the commander of the group, saying, "We're sorry, it was a mistake. We crossed into the waters, and sorry about that." It wasn't exactly an abject apology, right? He wasn't begging for life or mercy or saying, we're evil, and the United States is the great Satan. No, nothing like that. Just, hey, sorry about that mistake. But that was too much for lots of people. Donald Trump, the Republicans, apparently even Hillary Clinton, and they were personally humiliated by the picture of these sailors on their knees. As Dan Sanchez writes on Anti-War today, yes, much better they be humiliated by the TSA and the NSA and by their own government. But don't you dare, foreign government, humiliate our captors. Anyway, the weekend came and some cool things happened. Number one, there was a swap arranged between the U.S. and Iran to let out 5 Americans that have been held, including what is his first name? Jason Rezaian, who's the Washington Post, bureau chief in Iran, Iranian American, who had been held for, I don't know, like 500 days or something, but others have been in prison longer for various things and not always charged. I'm no fan of the Iranian justice system or the regime, period, which doesn't mean I think they're a threat to the United States. Those are two different things, or the American people. So there was a release. The U.S. ended up releasing 7 Iranian Americans, I think they're all dual citizens, so I could be wrong about that, who had been either convicted or charged with violating economic sanctions. In other words, victimless crime laws, since economic sanctions are a form of warfare under international law, and they shouldn't exist. So that happened. That was happy. And then at the same time, Saturday, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, certified that Iran indeed has complied with all its obligations under the nuclear agreement. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, the Americans were complaining that Iran was complying too quickly. It was way ahead of schedule. And the sanctions and frozen assets, which are supposed to be loosened or rolled back and unfrozen, that process began. All of which was good news because it lessens the chance, I think, of a war between Iran and the United States. But, of course, this was horrible news for America's hardliners, who were counting on their tacit allies, Iran's hardliners, to sabotage all this. But they didn't come through. Those Iranian hardliners are not reliable. They did not come through. And so, therefore, our hardliners are terribly disappointed today that there's no reason to go to war with Iran. I think that's the story in a nutshell.
God, that is disappointing, isn't it?
Oh, you feel just terrible.
I mean, I'm a masochist because I watched the damned debate, even without. I wrote, an impure piece for Anna War about how you can tell Rand Paul is better than nothing when Rand Paul isn't in the debate. I mean, I'm happy to criticize him all the time, including on things like sanctions. I'm not gonna, but when he wasn't there, there wasn't, without Rand Paul, there was absolutely no moderating influence, not the slightest amount of maybe we shouldn't always talk about, talk as if we want to bomb tomorrow. And people like, Ted Cruz, who so many libertarians, I just watched Jack Hunter and Julie Borowski's podcast, and it was good. And Jack has some very nuanced things to say. He's come over from a much more conservative side, and he has, he's talking about Black Lives Matter and supporting them and things like that. But he still said that, he's an electoral politics kind of guy, and he supports Rand Paul, and his very distant second, he said, is Ted Cruz. And there's always this element of like that there's something redeeming about Ted Cruz, and at this point, I really don't think there is. And in particular, because he was just full-on hawk pander, ranting, adolescent mode about the Iranian incident, saying the full force and fury of the United States would come down upon Iran, I guess, en masse, if Ted Cruz, if God blessed us enough to give us a Ted Cruz presidency. And just what fascinated me, and this Trump did the same thing. He's talking about how he's standing with construction workers, and they were like weeping at the indignity of the situation. Yeah, sure they were, dude. But it sounds adolescent to me, like all of that stuff. It's this delicate, sensitive thing. It's the opposite of how they think they sound. There was a brief incident, and my God, it's just it's the opposite of all that they're trying to project, this strength and this confidence. It's embarrassing. I mean.
Yeah, no, I like that people thought a few things juxtaposing the image of the sailors with the Abu Ghraib pictures, and
good Lord,
right.
Yeah.
Well, no, this was the pro-peace side doing this to show that people that are so outraged. Here's the way I put it. Imagine if the tables were turned. And other people have said this. Imagine if the tables were turned and Iranian boats crossed into U.S. territorial waters for some reason. Now, if the American president, whoever he was, did what these hawks would have wanted the Iranian government to do, presumably that would be what? Ignore the boats or just ask them to please leave? Now imagine a president of the United States doing that to Iranian boats that came into U.S. waters, and they just said, "Would you guys please leave?" In other words, not take them into custody even for, what was it, 12 hours, 18 hours.
Yeah.
They would be screaming for impeachment, wouldn't they? They'd be calling him Neville Chamberlain, or her, Neville Chamberlain, appeaser, capitulator,
it's
and
1938
demanding...
all over again, because it always
That's right.
is 1938 if you're a neocon. Every day.
In fact, if a president did exactly what the Iranians did and let them go the next day, Americans would be screaming at the president for being a coward and capitulating.
Right.
So it's so two-faced, it's so hypocritical. There's obviously one set of rules for the exceptional nation and a couple of its favorite allies. I'm thinking of one where the first initial is I, and I don't mean Iraq or Iran, which is not an ally.
Yes, I see your subtleties. I see them.
And then there's the rules for everybody else. I mean, it's so clear. And yet, how can you possibly defend that? I mean, it's a basic rule that you ought to be able to universalize, right? It goes back to Immanuel Kant. You ought to be able to universalize your moral principles, and there's something very crooked about saying the rules are one rule set of rules for us, and the other set of rules for we can cross into anybody's airspace, I say we, you know what I mean, anybody's water, but don't you dare do it to us. And remember, just a few months ago, when Turkey shot 2 Russian jets out of the sky that had merely crossed over one little area of territory, Turkish territory that jutted into Syria, juts in like it's an odd piece, a little like appendix almost kind of thing. They just cut across that. Obama defended Turkey's quote right to shoot down jets that crossed into their airspace without permission. Here are 2 boats that crossed into territorial water, without permission or notification. They didn't bomb them out of the water. The Iranians didn't bomb the ships, shoot the crew. They didn't give them the USS Liberty treatment that Israel gave to USS Liberty in 1967.
Right.
No. Took them into custody, and the next day they were released when they realized, for whatever reason they did. Maybe I don't know. Maybe the sailors were spying, or maybe it was just testing the defenses. But Iran was willing to overlook it and let it go and let them go. And part of the reason is that this channel was opened up right between Curry, who I'm no fan of generally, and Zarif and President Rouhani over there through the talks over the last couple of years.
And I'm assuming that even the theocrats and the hardliners in Iran are not suicidal. We've discussed this before. I mean, this idea that people, even with some irrational, or beliefs, that they all must be suicidal, even when they're in charge of an entire nation, is very odd concept. Right.
The mad mullahs. You hear the phrase, the mad mullahs.
Yeah.
That's just propaganda. They're not mad.
This idea that you're saying that the U.S. is hypocritical, and God knows that's true, but it's sort of this contradiction, though, because the U.S. says we have these noble beliefs and these high standards, and then you have the warmongering, and you have the imperialism, and you have all of these violations of the supposed standards, while simultaneously still saying we are the best, and therefore can do whatever we want, which includes, Abu Ghraib, or, the 1953 coup, or shooting down the airliner, or just anything like that. It's this double thing, and it doesn't work. If you want the high standards and the city on the hill and all that bullshit, then you have to actually have standards and not, I don't know.
But people buy it.
Yeah, they do.
Greenwald has done 2 Intercept posts on the subject of the sailors and the boats, and very nicely brought out how the media, the standard media, the establishment media, CNN especially, and they have to. The presumption is whatever we were doing, it was innocent, and it took a long time. It took an hour or so for CNN to let the viewers know that the boats actually had crossed into Iranian waters. They made it seem like a terrible thing had been done to the United States and never mentioned the fact, although the Pentagon was already saying it, that they had crossed into the water.
Wait, really? They weren't waiting. They weren't waiting for confirmation or something. They actually, I mean,
the Pentagon had already said it, and you can see the sequence
disturbing.
in Greenwald. Right, and then of course, even once they mentioned it, that quickly got shoved to the side, like, oh, that's just a small detail, that doesn't matter. Let's look at what Iran is doing. They're holding our guys. Well, there was one woman in the group. They're holding our people, our sailors. And we're America, so there's got to be something wrong with this.
I mean, I grant that Iran has held people. I mean, obviously after the embassy takeover in 1979, and more recently with people who certainly don't deserve to be imprisoned over in Iran, including that journalist who was just released. Like, I grant that there are times when this has happened, but to just start screaming the moment it happens, like as if they've been held for 444 days instead of an hour and a half, is just the most horrible self-sabotage, and again, the most adolescent sort of not diplomacy, because I mean, all they want is other nations to be cowed and to, I don't know, I mean, just to never, for a moment do anything that, I don't know, they want robots, they want colonies, they want,
Well, like Trump is promising, the military is going to be so big and so great and so huge, so terrific, that no one will mess with us. That's what he says. So everyone's going to be cowering. Everywhere else in the world, people will just be cowering, saying, "Don't make the Americans mad, because we're in big trouble." Look, I'm no fan of, as everybody should know, Iran is not a libertarian society. It's a much freer society than our good old ally Saudi Arabia. Where would you rather be, a Jew or a Christian or a woman for that matter, in Tehran or in Riyadh? I mean, there's no contest. There are churches and synagogues in Tehran. Women can drive in Iran. They can go to medical school in Iran and do all kinds of stuff that they can't do in our good old ally Saudi Arabia, which meanwhile has been funding ISIS or certainly bin Ladenites, with a lot of the money ending up in the hands of ISIS, and is committing genocide against the Yemenis backed by the United States. That's our great ally, doing terrible, terrible things, and recently just beheaded a bunch of Shiites, including a Shia cleric, which has now increased the friction between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So, as a comparison, I'd rather have Iran as an ally if we're going to have allies. You know what I think of that. Anyway, but I don't have to portray Tehran or Iran as a place that I want to live. It's a theocracy, certainly, but although people can practice other religions, it's not a completely free society. It may be freer, but it's not a free society. And I wouldn't trust their criminal justice system, their justice system. The prisons certainly sound pretty bad, but not that ours are any great shakes, and we got a whole lot of people in prison, don't we? But let's put it in context. You mentioned the coup in 1953. The CIA went in with bags of cash and got people to drive a democratically elected, actually elected by a parliament, but a parliament which is democratically elected, prime minister, secular, left-of-center government, Mohammad Mossadegh, drove him out of power and restored the power of the Shah, who was an autocrat, who ruled with an iron hand and secret police, thanks to the U.S. for 25 years and Israel for 25 years, giving them military equipment of all kinds, training their secret police. They engaged in torture, all kinds of stuff. Finally, that boiled up in 1979 in a revolution against the Shah. And while there were liberal elements in the revolution, the religious authorities got the upper hand because there was a religious reaction to this secular autocratic rule by the Shah. And so they then imposed their theocratic regime in 1979, and you had the seizure of the American embassy, and I forget how many people were in the embassy at the time, and held them for 444 days. Obviously, people that wanted to just stick their thumb in the eyes of the United States, which had abused Iran for so long. I don't defend the taking of the hostages, but you can understand what happens there. And then ever since that time, the U.S. has been at low-level war with Iran, covertly, by proxy, by cyber war. They tried to mess up their nuclear centrifuges, with what was that called, Stuxnet, a worm, a bug that they injected into the computers at Israel. Our ally has assassinated scientists. All kinds of stuff. They've gotten this crazy Marxist Iran cult, the MEK, which was on Iraq's side in the Iraq War, to commit terrorism against, go over the border and attack Iran, and also another group called Jandala. So the U.S. has been fighting Iran. Iran's not been fighting back, but the U.S. has been conducting this multi-layer, subtle war and sometimes not so subtle war for decades, including helping Saddam Hussein when he attacked Iraq in the 80s by giving them satellite intelligence regarding bombings and also the precursors to the chemical weapons that Saddam then used against the Iranians. The U.S. was on Iraq's side. So for Iraq, why should Iran look at the U.S. as some sort of, benign country? And that the only explanation for why they do any of the things they do is that they hate us, or they think we're just the great Satan because of some religious dispute. That's ridiculous. It's politics, and it's the U.S. that has been aggressive against them all these years.
And it's child's politics. I mean, like, you are perfectly nuanced. You are correctly libertarian. You're not defending anything. You're simply pointing out some historical facts and some human, logical human behavior, which is, boy, the U.S. has a history of sticking its nose in this nation, and accordingly, as a general summation of our view, we don't trust the U.S. This is like a child can figure out this kind of thing. I mean, that you are different than me, and you did something and I have a reaction. You were mean to me and I have a reaction. You tricked me and I, distrust you. It's the most basic human stuff. And as soon as you get on an international scale, these people have this idea that I don't know, the Iranians should know all of our true American hearts, and that we, and just do and magically be transformed and love and trust America, and then do whatever America wants at any time. I mean, it's just so diluted. And again, my endless cry is, and they say libertarians are utopian. Yet they're the ones who think that people should behave in a way that is completely not human behavior. And they can't even, I mean, you can still be a horrible hawk. You can still have lots of bad ideas and still grant that Iran has every single reason to distrust the United States. I mean, and so Cuba had reasons. Lots of places I don't want to live, run by people I don't like. There's a lot of reasons to distrust the U.S. I mean,
yeah. And those policies, and I don't think this is really an accident. I think in some people's minds it's considered a good thing. That encourages the hardest of the hardliners on the other side.
Right.
I mean, the kinds of policies that McCain with his bomb Iran, remember that, and then Cruz and Trump and Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush made a really hawkish statement. He compared to the others these days, he's looking sort of almost dovish, right? He said after the taking of the sailors, he said, I'd get them on the phone and tell them, release them now, or we're going to unleash our military might or something.
Well, at least he used the phone. I mean, most of them weren't even suggesting that. They just go directly to the bombs. I mean, without even dialing, without a courtesy call.
So this is what nationalism does to people. That's my point, and also a point nicely made by another Dan Sanchez article on anti-war. His analysis has been really good, and he's had a few good pieces on this. This is what it does. It blinds you. It turns USA, which they were saying at the Trump rally earlier today, into it's as if you're rooting for your home team in a sport. And of course, your team is always right, and you hate the other team, and the other team. It's like that stupid elementary juvenile mentality, like my team right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Except we're talking about something serious here, okay? Two baseball teams aren't going to go to war, but the countries can, and a lot of people get killed, and it won't be Americans that suffer the most. It'll be the carpet bombing, to adopt one of Cruz's favorite terms, apparently, wherever they happen to choose to lay the carpet. This is the state and nationalism just makes people stupid.
And I mean, like, not even kidding, but a lot of people are much more nuanced and critical of their favorite sports teams than they are of American policy. So, I mean, that's definitely something that I've seen as well. And the stakes are, baseball, significantly lower in that case. Yeah.
But it's very frustrating because it's so easy to whip people up into a frenzy. I think if... luckily Obama doesn't seem crazy about going to war with Iran. He didn't really want to go to war. He didn't want to attack Syria. I remember a few years ago when that was being talked about. And reporting is that he didn't want to attack Libya, but he let himself be talked into it by Clinton and Samantha Power and Susan Rice. And we see what happened there, which in my view means Hillary should be banished to Chappaqua and never heard from again.
Quite. I've been thinking back. Obama did some bad things and a million other obvious caveats, but a couple months ago, maybe sometime last year, Matt Welsh wrote an article which basically suggested, unfortunately, Barack Obama may eventually be looked back at by libertarians as like sort of okay, and he fully clarified how unfortunate that is and the low standards we're working with and all that sort of thing. But it was a compelling and extremely depressing case that Welsh made. And partially, part of the reason why Obama is going to seem better than he is because the criminal justice reform movement, he did the thing that John Stossel once sagely pointed out the government does, is they stand in front of the parade and pretend they're leading it. Obama, but simply by virtue of not blocking the efforts and the momentum towards reform on criminal justice, can look really, really good because he just was like, oh, we'll let this happen. We'll help, eventually help streamline the pardon process, which I ignored for 6 years, and that makes him look great. And he assassinated an American teenager with a drone and, legally argued his right to kill us all if necessary, but he also hasn't gone to war. That kid picked a bad father, let's be fair. Who said that? I forget. Who?
Yeah, someone did say that.
I forget who said that. Yeah.
It might have been a Republican, though. It might have been somebody like Cheney, I think. Saying he should have picked other parents. No, that's true. You can overstate because of a couple of things Obama did not do or really seemed reluctant to do. It's possible, if you only think of those things, to overstate this Welsh point. Look, a lot of the bad things he does are really out of sight. The drone war, which he's way exceeded Bush on the drones in Pakistan, in Somalia, in Yemen. But that's out of sight. That doesn't really get covered unless you can go looking for good in-depth magazine articles online, and you'll find some stuff. But it's not on the nightly news, so that's easy to forget about that. what's happening in Yemen is truly, truly bad. I mean, he is acting as the air traffic control for Saudi Arabia's Air Force, and also doing, in-air refueling of Saudi planes that are ruthlessly bombing Yemen. And there's a starvation blockade against Yemen. Yemen's the poorest country in the Middle East. There's a humanitarian catastrophe going on. And why is it? Are they fighting Al-Qaeda types or ISIS? No, they're fighting the Houthis, which has been an oppressed minority that had been for a long time trying to get autonomy or self-rule or something like that, which then made an advance on the capital recently. And because they're sort of Shia, although they're an odd sort of Shia, which has, I read, they actually have some more in common with Sunnis than with the Iranian Shias, but because they're Shia and have gotten a little bit of material help from Iran, and no one has shown that it's anything major, Obama is on the Saudi side as a way of fighting Iranian expansion in the Middle East, which is ridiculous. A Houthi move on the capital of Yemen is not Iranian expansion. And by the way, as Scott Horton has often brought out, when the Houthis started moving to the capital, Iran told them don't do it, and they didn't listen to them. So this is not an Iranian move. This idea that Iran is on the march, which is part of the neocon Republican, and even you hear it from Obama people, line, is ridiculous. I mean, they didn't conquer Iraq. We let them, in effect, by overthrowing Saddam Hussein, the U.S. made it possible for Baghdad to become a satellite of Iran. The U.S. did it with eyes open. They didn't give them Syria. They didn't take over Syria. They've long been an ally of Syria. It's not like they're making a move on Syria. And as I just said, they're not making a move on Yemen or trying to take over Yemen. They're not on the move. They have a tiny military budget, small compared to Saudi Arabia, small compared to Israel, almost no offensive capability whatever. And they haven't invaded a country in 200 years or 300 years. So if you had to pick an ally in the Middle East, I don't think we should be in the Middle East or have allies in the Middle East. We should have trade, but no allies. But if we had to pick an ally, I'd pick Iran. They have a highly educated middle class that love Americans.
Yeah.
They didn't knock down the Twin Towers.
No, they didn't.
There were no Iranians.
Yeah, it's I've lost it. I had to point out that went out of my brain.
You'll get it.
Yeah,
so I'm not whitewashing Iran. I'll fill in until you get it. I'll fill in some space. I'm not whitewashing Iran at all. I've been accused of somehow being a fan of the theocracy. No way.
Yeah, when I think of you, Sheldon Richman, I think theocrat, raving theocrat. That's really you.
That's right. I'm just dying to live under where religion would be imposed on me. Please impose religion on me.
Well, I
don't have the self-discipline to impose it on myself.
I don't want neocons, hawks, whomever to get more clever, but I even plead for nuance from them, just because I think it's amazing that they're so bad. It's not just that they want to bomb places and invade places. It's that I don't know. I think about the people who were horrified by the opening up of Cuba and the U.S.'s relationship, as if that translates to an official declaration from the U.S. that all the bad things the Castros had ever done were actually great, and that's the U.S.'s official stance on this. As if to try to talk to these nations is to condone all that they have ever done, or even the leaders to condone all that they've ever done. And these are frequently the people who think they're for free trade and who think that they're for small government. But basically they're saying, because the stupid Castro brothers have been in charge of Cuba for 60 years, that means if we even, call them on the phone or see them at an official gathering of nations, then my God, that would just be like saying it was all good. And that's just, none of that follows.
Right.
It's like they don't want to de-escalate tensions. I mean, they want, until these places are willing to just be satellites of the United States. They don't want to talk to them. They don't want trade. They don't want free travel. Nothing until you do whatever the U.S. says, whenever it says, whenever it's jump, how high, sir. Like, that's all they want. And nothing else will do.
Yep. No, it's true. And, I think for a good part of the 19th century, the policy was recognition of a de facto government, if there had been some upheaval, a revolution, a new government comes to power, there was just, as a matter of course, there was recognition, exchange of ambassadors with the de facto government. In other words, we were not going to sit in judgment as far as just recognition goes, diplomatic recognition.
Right.
And that's a form of non-interventionism. I mean, that's a manifestation of non-interventionism, because you're not going to meddle by saying we recognize you, but we won't recognize you. And then that changed. That became and I guess with the Soviet Union, since the U.S. didn't recognize the Soviet Union or exchange ambassadors until Franklin Roosevelt. So from 1917 to 1933, the U.S. did not recognize. And then there was China, of course.
I should have known, but I don't think I did.
Yeah, the first ambassador to the Soviet Union was William Bullitt, who was appointed by Roosevelt.
Yeah, I mean, with the Cold War, you come back to this. There are a million examples of the dangers of having an official ally. Obviously, World War I, the disastrous dominoes of, well, you went to war, and now I have to go to war, and I guess I got to war against you. But also with the Soviet Union, a lot of that lack of nuance. And, I don't like the Soviet Union. I'm not even particularly fond of sort of more self-actualized, vaguely Marxist stuff in Nicaragua and Vietnam. Even I'm not for that. But the Cold War, from my view, a lot of time was all about forcing smaller countries to cuddle up to the bosom of the Soviet Union, because it was going to be one or the other. They were forced. They needed a big guy in their corner, and they didn't want to be U.S. puppets. So having the Soviets fight, but proxy war stuff, just forcing things into this, just like this clash that didn't need to happen. And again, to me, it's a lack of recognition that there are people in these countries who are trying to figure things out, who are not either your mortal enemy and all, the worst people, or your puppet, and there's no in between. It's just there are people over there, and it's a lack of acknowledgement of that at the end of the day.
Right, they became pawns, and we weren't going to tolerate non-aligned nations. It was like George W. Bush said after 9/11, right? You're either with us or you're against us. So there couldn't be any non-alignment during the Cold War. So we put pressure, and we did help. That policy pushed some countries toward Egypt, for example, toward the Soviet Union, where they had no natural love for the Soviet Union. I mean, Egypt, while it was of secular rule, Egyptians are Muslims, and atheist communists weren't exactly their natural ally, and yet, as a matter of convenience, because they didn't want to align with the U.S., because the U.S. was making demands and expecting the whole program to be, adopted by the whatever country it is, which, of course, Israel was a factor there with Egypt couldn't align with the U.S. because the U.S. was aligned with Israel. So you create these unnatural combinations and irrational demands, and you end up encouraging the hardliners and also encouraging alliances then that the U.S. says are additional reasons not to be friendly with whatever the particular nation is. So it's a perverse system. It's there's a lot of things going on. There's the desire for hegemony, but there's also economic benefits, right, as far as arms sales and placing of bases and all that stuff. So it's both power, prestige, and money that profits that all align. So isn't it amazing how nicely they all align? That what's good for the countries also happens to be good for my bottom line. I mean, so it must be great.
That does sound just wonderful. I'm looking
What a
forward
coincidence.
to the future when sort of autonomous Marxist groups are our new best friends to fight against radical Islam. Because you have things like there was like the PKK, who are officially terrorists, who helped save some of the Yazidi who were trying to get away from ISIS last year. I just, and you have the Mujahideen, who were supposed to be the guys who were going to save, heroically fight off the Soviets. So, whomever is just making more trouble that day. Today we're, close with the Marxists, and tomorrow we're going to train a new set of Muslim freedom fighters. Whatever works. We're not picky.
Right, and the U.S. at times has been on the Muslim Brotherhood side in Egypt, because they didn't like Nasser, going back to the 50s, and other times, they warned that groups like the Muslim Brotherhood are dangerous. And but there's a Muslim brother. There's a famous picture you can find on the internet of a Muslim Brotherhood leader in the White House in the Oval Office with Eisenhower being entertained by Eisenhower.
Wow.
So yeah, it is realpolitik. It's cynical. It's opportunistic, and one day it's right out of George Orwell. Of course, it's not so much out of Orwell. Orwell took it out of real life.
Quite, yes.
It's not that he was a prophet. He wanted to call it 1948. That stuff was already going on when Orwell was writing his book. Yes, and they said, no, it's not going to be. That's not good. His publishers talked him into 1984. So he wasn't predicting something. He was just a very perceptive observer. That an enemy one day was a friend the next day, and then you denied that he was ever an enemy. I mean, it was a caricature. He exaggerated things for the novel, but he was seeing what was going on, right? So I love Orwell, and it's a great book, but we shouldn't give him too much credit because I don't think he would claim he was making predictions. He was just extrapolating trends that he saw and practices that he saw already.
True. I mean, and editing people out of existence in sort of the 1930s Stalinistic style. Yeah. It's true. The more you know about history, and the more times you read that book and you compare, you go, oh. But I did not know with the title, and I think that is that is interesting. I
think they felt it would give it a different flavor if you're making it. I think it's 1940. The book comes out in 43. I think the same year as the Road to Serfdom.
It came out.
It is, isn't it?
I thought he died in 50.
44? So. Is it 44 maybe?
It came out after, I thought, World War II, because he died in 50, and I'd heard that it was kind of bleak because he was unwell and he was feeling, sort of pessimistic about things. I'm not sure. I think it was a little later than that.
I think they thought it wouldn't sound as much of a novel if the title was placing the story just a year or two off or a few years off. It was something that was kind of the reason that they recommended that they move it, put it way in the future. But so it gives a sense that he's making predictions. But in fact, he was just he was a journalist, so he was up on things, and he had been in the Spanish-American War and Spanish Civil War, and wrote a book about that. And so he definitely knew what was going on. He knew who was whom. And he was very perceptive.
Yeah,
that's a great book. That's a book that everybody should read once a year.
Yeah, like no doubt. I've read that
it's been a couple of years from me, but I ought to reread it.
I don't know how many times I've read that book, but it's more than half a dozen probably.
And every time you read it, at least my experience is, I think, my gosh, I forgot how good this book is. Especially the language, the stuff related to language. If you're a language buff, like I think we are, just his understanding of the manipulation of language and how powerful that can be is you just say, oh my goodness, why does he have the handle on this stuff?
I was musing. I just want to talk about this now. It suddenly occurred to me, and I guess spoiler alert for 1984 if you haven't read it. But I've always thought of the ending as the most unrealistic part, in that there's this idea that the party will always win, and they do sort of know everything. But then, of course, after 6 readings, it took me this long to realize that it doesn't matter if that's literally true, because they can give off that impression as they break, Winston Smith, and so that's all All it matters is the power that you can project. It doesn't matter if you literally really run everything and literally get everybody in the end. I don't know, but all of this is to say that, you can read it 6 times and still go, oh, right, of course. So there's an awful lot there.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. 2 and 2 are 5.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to just say it. They want you to believe it.
Yeah.
Not just say it.
Shudder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite.
I thought the Richard Burton movie was pretty good. It's really dark, but as it should be. But I thought it was good. I don't know. Maybe some people didn't like it. But.
Is that the one that came out in actually 1984? There's
I think it sounds about right. I hadn't remembered that it came out in 84, but I think I was going to guess the 80s, and that would make sense that it would come out in 84.
Well, is that I always get the Hertz confused because there's William and then there's John Hurt, and
yeah, that was John.
John Hurt looked exactly how I pictured Winston Smith, like almost to a bizarre extent. I was like, my God, that's exactly right. But yeah,
William Hurt's the blonde from what is it, Network News, or what was that movie called? Network, not Network. Yeah, that was Peter Finch, but
he's the one who tried to pick up my mom when she was a waitress long ago in Hollywood. She was like, no, I don't think so.
He was in the movie Smoke, which is a favorite movie of mine, but not a political movie. John Hurt, yeah.
We always get into a fictional tangents, usually about the Americanization of Emily, but there's a lot here that perhaps we should plan to someday have an official one, or I should on my other podcast, which I always forget to promote.
Yeah, we should do that because I watched a good movie. I'll recommend it. It's an HBO movie, and I found it on HBO Now. I guess it's called the streaming service called The Pentagon Wars, which I'd never known about. It's based on a book written by a Pentagon whistleblower, a guy who was investigating the testing of the Bradley armored vehicle and all the corruption involved with that, rigging tests. It was Kelsey Grammer and what's his name, Cary Elwes, however he pronounces it. Anyway, good movie if you like a dark comedy. It is funny, but a true story about just spending and it was stuff that had nothing to do with security. It was just lining people's pockets and lying about tests. I know that's a tangent, but if you're looking for a good movie, a good political movie that's funny, that's one to see.
I'll make a note. Well.
So more about Iran then. So the next question is, will this change the Middle East now that this agreement has been? I should want to say one other thing, just to get a plug in case we have anybody who's watching or will be watching who is not aware of this. Iran did sign an agreement, which is, if you were afraid Iran was going to develop a nuclear weapon, you should like the agreement. If you believe that, you should like the agreement, because which they've complied with, because it pretty much shuts off the ability to make a nuclear weapon. They had to ship out most of their low enriched uranium, and that's like 3 or so some percent, which is used to make electricity. But they had to ship that out to Russia. They had to turn the rest of it into like rods and plates, which can't then be used to weaponize, only good for fuel, to make like power plants. They had to reduce and get rid of or scrap centrifuges down from, 20,000 to like 3,000. They had to take this hard water reactor that would have plutonium in the byproduct. They had to scuttle that and fill the core with cement, which they've done. They've had to do all these things. Now, okay, so like I say, and I'm really stressing the word if here, if you believe Iran was intending to build a nuclear weapon, has been trying, you should love this agreement. This is why Netanyahu and Israel and the others I don't think are being honest, because if they're really afraid of Iran getting a nuke, they should like this agreement. There's going to be like a 24-hour, 24/7 inspection, all kinds of stuff. constant satellite, surveillance by the U.S. and cameras, and it's everything. It's unbelievable to hear Trump say, "Oh, this is a bad deal." It's just nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But the reason I stress the word "if" is because Iran has not been trying to get a nuclear weapon. Now, here's a funny thing. Here would be Trump claims he's the master of making the deal, right? The art of the deal. I would love to hear him say, "I told you our leaders are stupid. Look how bad this deal is. Iran has promised to give up a weapon they had no interest in obtaining and have never tried to develop. That's a terrible deal." But of course, he can't say that.
No, of course not.
But that's what Iran has done. Iran has given up a weapon it didn't have, wasn't trying to get, and didn't want to get.
Well,
and
that
we have a lot of reasons for this.
and untrustworthy, and we must, attack them.
That's usually how sneaky they are.
Yeah.
They're willing to make an agreement to not get something they don't want. Now, if you don't believe me, read Gareth Porter's book, Manufactured Crisis. I've linked to it many, many times, and Scott has Gareth on all the time. Read the book. It's a very heavily documented book. It's very clear to read. He goes through the whole history of it. Iran had chances to develop nuclear weapons. It did not do it. During the Iraq War, as I mentioned, Saddam Hussein attacked with chemical weapons. Iran could have made chemical weapons. It had the ingredients. And military people went to the Ayatollah. This was the first Ayatollah, Khomeini, and said, "We should make chemical weapons and retaliate." And I don't know that the world would have been that horrified because of it would have been retaliation. I mean, Iraq used it first. Khomeini said, "No, those are un-Islamic. They're contrary to Islamic law, weapons of mass destruction. We will not do it." That's very telling, because under that kind of pressure, where they could have done it easily, they had a chemical industry. They did not do it. And that kind of conduct is repeated in the nuclear context, as Porter shows painstakingly with lots of documentation. So if anybody wonders about this, I mean, you could find plenty of summaries of his book. I did kind of a rolling review of his book at the Future Freedom Foundation, like 6 or 7 op-eds that reviewed a chapter at a time. It was kind of like a stretched out review. So if you don't want to read the whole book, although I recommend you do, look that up, or go listen to his interviews with Scott Horton. There are a lot of them. That would be a long way to do it. But if you really want to, if you like information that way, but don't take my word for it. So they have not had a military nuclear program. They had a civilian program, which the U.S. helped start when the Shah was in power.
That's right.
You hear people say, that's right. And you hear people say, "Well, why would Iran want to need a nuclear, civilian nuclear power program when they have all that oil?" Well, maybe they know that someday the price is dropping of oil now, or they don't. They may run out of oil. But if you can ask the question of the current regime, why was the U.S. helping the Shah start a civilian nuclear program when they had all the oil? They had more oil back then because they used less. They had used less by then. It was only in the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s. So that's not a very good question for the current regime if the U.S. was promoting it with the old regime. So, read the book or look that stuff up. They weren't doing it. And besides, what would they do with a nuclear weapon? Israel has, a couple of hundred nuclear warheads? It's the nuclear monopolist. It's not part of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, so it's not inspected. Iran is a signer of it and is constantly inspected. Even before this agreement, it was constantly inspected. Just go look at compare the situations, and you'll see the facts.
Well, this becomes another eerie thing, though, because you have, the Hawks. They would dispute this. They would dispute, everything that you just said in terms of Iran wanting a weapon. And I've seen the Khomeini quote, I think, about weapons of mass destruction being un-Islamist, and they would probably dispute that. And then they would go on and on about all the people who say "death to America" all the time, as if fucking burning a few flags is somehow like just so much worse than shooting down an airliner, helping with chemical weapons, and staging a coup. But that's that's right. More part of their wussy foreign policy whining. But they still dispute the actual And they also say that Iran wants, has constantly threatens to destroy Israel, which is not, as is my understanding, generally exactly what they're saying, because to not approve of Israel as a country, and they're not even saying what I think about it, is not the same thing as threatening to wipe it off the map with implicitly a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, every anarchist ever would be constantly threatening to nuke every country ever because they disapprove of them. I mean, that's not. They act as if these are equivalent things, and they're of course not.
Right. Well, Ahmadinejad, the former president, who had zero authority over the military. The president is not in charge of the military in Iran. That's under the Ayatollah. He quoted the original Ayatollah, and it was mistranslated. You can find stuff on Juan Cole's, who's a Middle East scholar, website, his blog. I think it's called Informed Comment. And there have been other discussions in the New York Times about this, how they mistranslated a quotation that Ahmadinejad was relaying, was quoting the Ayatollah, and I think much closer to the literal Farsi was that we look to the day when the Zionist regime in Jerusalem is erased from the pages of history. That's not a military threat.
No, it's not.
And also, it didn't even say Israel or the Jews of Israel. It said the Zionist regime. So you can interpret it as you like, but it was not, we are going to get a nuke and nuke you. First of all, like you were saying in the very beginning, they're not suicidal. Often the hawks act like they do respond to threats and incentives and disincentives. Some days that they make them out to be perfectly rational. Other days they want us to believe that they're not rational. So it depends on what's convenient. But Israel has an awesome nuclear arsenal. It's the only nuclear power in the Middle East. It has invulnerable submarine based nukes, which means that it has a second strike capability that can't be touched. So what's Iran going to do with one or two warheads, even if they got them, and some missiles? Obviously, that would just be deterrent if they were to do that, which they haven't done. They know, and the Iranian leaders have said a nuke would be more trouble than it would be worth.
Right.
It would have no value, but it would be a big headache, and so it's perfectly rational. Plus, you have the Ayatollah issuing a fatwa specifically against nuclear. The second Ayatollah, the current one, Khamenei, saying it's un-Islamic. It's contrary to Islamic law to have weapons of mass destruction, and that's consistent with their actions. It's not just a matter of taking their word for it. Again, you can look at the Porter book. So I know it seems so one-sided that some people find it hard to believe. They say, oh, come on, it can't be that way.
Right, yeah.
But why not? Why can't it be? Again, I'm not saying it's a libertarian country or it's a government I want to live under, so I'm not saying that they're all wrong about when they describe the Iranian regime. No, it's not a regime that we should admire, but that doesn't mean it's out to destroy the United States or even Israel.
Or that it's not, or that these people want to. I do think, I don't think there are that many circumstances when the U.S. and or Israel would actually use a nuclear weapon, thankfully. But if Iran one day decided to use their one or two ones they had secretly squirreled away on Israel, they know what would happen. Israel's subs would respond, and the U.S. would probably do something atrocious too. And everybody knows that, including, religious people. And they're not, Iran, it has, this kind of some of the stability of a nation state. They're not, I understand a little bit more being afraid of ISIS or sort of a lone wolf, but even ISIS is attempting their caliphate. There are very few groups and very few people, even awful ones, who are suicidal enough to want to start off something that on the level of an actual nuke. And the idea that Iran out of any of them is somehow the most likely is just so absurd,
Right, and they're aware of their history.
Yeah.
Persia is a very old country and civilization, and there's pride in it. It's had achievements over millennia. They know all that. You think they just would, wipe it away? To do what? They don't mind getting obliterated because of their dying thought. They say, yeah, we wiped out Israel at least. No, come on. That's ridiculous. And where is the behavior that even gives a hint of that? You won't find it.
No.
But the U.S. has been, decades, openly talks about war is always on the table. We were not taking war off the table.
I mean, they talk as if Iran is constantly threatening everybody, but the things the U.S. says, to say nothing of the things they've done, but just simply the way the U.S. talks about Iran is so, is
After the final nuclear agreement was signed, the day after, Ash Carter, I call him the War Secretary. I don't think we should call it Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of War, Ashton Carter, said, he was in Israel, I believe, at the time. He went to Israel probably to calm them down about, because they didn't like the agreement. He said, war is still on the table. War is still an option. They just signed the agreement.
Always on the table.
That's why I called for all tables being removed from the White House, so they can't put any options on it. I mean, that would be a step for peace. Because peace is never on the table. It's always war that's on the table.
That's true.
And they're also like they'll talk about the full power of the United States, which means nuclear weapons too. They won't even rule out the use of nuclear weapons.
The Republican debate was a child's tantrum participated in by every person on stage. That's what it was. It was how dare they insult us.
And you have to show how tough you are. It's just like a macho contest, right? You got to show I'm tougher than you are.
It's teenage, it's like a 14-year-old boy trying to be a badass. It's not adult strength in any way. It's you made a mean face at me, so I'm going to punch you in the face.
Right. And there's this incentive to have this sort of rhetoric race, like an arms race, where you have to be.
Yeah, that was.
Cruz has to sound tougher than Trump, and then Rubio's got to sound tougher than Cruz, and it's escalation, and it's talk is cheap, although there could be consequences, but at the moment talk is cheap. You can just say it.
Here's hoping in this case.
Your base will like it, and maybe you'll win over a few from the other guy's base, and you don't care that some realist writing in foreign policy like Andy Bacevich or Andrew Bacevich or Stephen Walt points out why that's not a good thing to say. They don't care about that.
No, they don't.
In fact, they love if somebody who seems like establishment is criticizing you, that's all to the good. That just shows your cred, right?
God, I hate politics.
There's a good reason to hate it. I see we are 2 minutes after the hour, at least by my clock.
Mine as well. My smooth segue is on Thursday at 10, people should watch Politics for People Who Hate Politics, which is also on Liberty.me. Because that is my truly accurately named other podcast, which someday I'll get Sheldon on because I want to see what he does on a panel.
Oh, okay, yeah. Please do.
But in general, you should read Sheldon at Reason and his own Free Association blog. And last time I checked, he had a Patreon where you can give him sweet.
Yeah, you can become a patron of Free Association, which is sheldonrichman.com. Any amount is welcome. Keep it going. But it also ends up at Reason and Liberty.me. I always kind of as an afterthought. It shouldn't be an afterthought. And
well,
also,
we're here on Liberty.me.
Anti-War, I'm now listed as a columnist at Anti-War in the august company of Lucy Steigerwald and other great people. Media with Conscience, they post my stuff. And also sometimes, not all the time, but often at Counterpunch. So I'm trying to reach decent leftists who don't like war.
Yeah, they tend to lurk at Counterpunch. I read them sometimes, but I forget. I should read them more than I do because there's often good stuff over there.
Yeah, some good stuff there. They don't like. They know who Hillary really is, so they're not fooled.
Exactly.
Anyway, thanks everybody for attending.
Yes, thank you.
We'll be here 2 weeks from tonight with another great topic. I don't know what it is yet.
All right,
we'll let the political agenda dictate that.
alas, as it dictates so many things. But it's been a pleasure ranting with you as always, and I hope the audience tonight
Likewise.
and in future also enjoys it, and we will see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.